You're listening to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast, presented by Trainer Road, cycling's most effective training tool.
Yeah, it's been a huge year for me, winning E3 and such a great tour, getting married, honeymoon, book coming out and everything. But I think the highlight has to be winning Podcast's Pedal de Champs award, for sure. That t-shirt, it's pride of place in my wardrobe.
This is only the beginning. You can't even imagine what we are going to do for the future.
With exclusive interviews and the best analysis on two wheels, this is the Telegraph Cycling Podcast.
Hello, my name's Richard Moore. I'm with our Director of Marginal Gains, Daniel Friebe.
Hello.
Head of Winning Behaviours, Lionel Birnie.
Hello. Really?
Yeah, I just thought I'd formalise the roles.
Wow. That doesn't bode well for the future of the podcast if I'm in charge of winning behaviours.
I think you've always been in charge of winning behaviours.
Good.
Lionel.
Well.
Consider me the orchestra conductor.
Of course.
Listen, Lionel, give us your weekly roundup.
Indeed. Okay, well, the season well and truly underway now in the Dubai Tour. Marcel Kittel, he is back, 2 stage wins and the overall after a very impressive performance on the lumpiest of the stages there, in addition to the stage wins he got. Meanwhile, in Valencia, the return to the calendar, the Tour of Valencia, we'll call it, shall we? After a gap of 8 years, won by Wout Poels of Team Sky. Stein Vandenberg won a stage with a plastic bag stuck in his gears. That was the other notable event from southern Spain. Meanwhile, down under, the racing continues with the Herald Sun Tour. Chris Froome attacked each time over Arthur's Seat on the final stage to unseat his teammate Pete Kennaugh and win overall. And there was a bit of beef between Kennaugh and an Aussie rider called Pat Shaw.
Peter Kennaugh attacked as well, but not in the sense we understand.
Not in the bike racing sense, no. Down in the south of France, the Etoile de Bessèges was won by Jérôme Coppel. The Ladies Tour of Qatar was won by Trixie Worrack. And Mark Cavendish is off and running in his new Dimension Data colours, winning the opening stage of the Men's Tour of Qatar. The other big news of the week, Eduard Vorganov of Katusha, positive test. The 8th doping case for Katusha since their inception in 2009. I could list the other 7, but we'll maybe talk about that later on.
Well, I think we'll start with Marcel Kittel. We've also got in this week's show little interviews with Alex Peters, who was an important part of the Team Sky team down in the south of Spain, helping Wout Poels to win it in Valencia, and from Fran Miller, who is business manager, I think is her new, less convoluted title at Team Sky now. So we'll hear from her as well, just about, they've had a very successful opening to the season, suggests that they will be as dominant in stage races as they were last year. So let's hear what other things they're planning to do this year. But Dubai, first of all, I think Marcel Kittel, who looked phenomenal. I mean, that lumpy stage that you mentioned, Lionel, that really was the bedrock of his overall win. Remember, John Degenkolb won that last year, and it was a sort of portent of what was to come. It was a sign that, that a sprinter could survive. He's a bit more of an all-rounder than Kittel, but I thought Kittel's performance to remain in contention on a pretty tough finish with some pretty good all-rounders was arguably his performance of the week.
The stage you're talking about is the one to Hatta Dam, isn't it? Where, as you said, Degenkolb was very impressive last year, and it is really a raw test of power. I mean, the steep part is only 150 metres, isn't it? And if a sprinter goes into that climb with a decent position, then they can do quite well. And we saw that. But having said that, Kittel is obviously very fit this year. As Mark Cavendish said in his interviews at the end of the week, he should be fit because he's had an awful long time without racing. He's had a lot of time to concentrate on rediscovering his best form, and he's clearly done that, and he's clearly going to be a force to be reckoned with. Also impressive, I think, last week was the way Etixx-QuickStep led him out. There was some concern, I think, when he made that move from Giant Alpecin to Etixx-QuickStep. There was no ready-made train there because Cavendish, of course, had taken Renshaw with him to Dimension Data. It was really what looked on paper like a makeshift lead-out train, wasn't it, with Kittel in Dubai, and yet they made light work of it.
They did. It was very impressive and important, I would have thought, for Kittel to get winning again, because we knew that he was in great shape, but the confidence that comes with winning is not something you can achieve or replicate in training, is it?
Well, especially after the year he had last year, where more or less nothing went right for him, and then changing teams and coming to an environment that demands winning. Patrick Lefevere not always been the most patient when he's spent a lot of money on riders. He does demand results, and it is very early in the season, but just to get those first couple on the board early on, it just lifts an awful lot of pressure. There's none of that, when's Kittel going to win, when's Cavendish going to win. As soon as they're off the mark, everything can kind of relax a little bit around them.
Yeah, if anything, we'll talk a bit about Tour of Qatar, which has just started as we're speaking, and Cavendish has got off the mark there. I thought actually he would have not been too unhappy with events in Dubai. You know, he was unlucky on one stage, but he was second on the opening stage to Kittel, not a million miles away. I thought he'd be reasonably happy with that, considering the preparation he's had over the winter.
I think he was, and I think he's also happy to be in a position now where the expectation isn't so great, and in a team which, Dimension Data, which doesn't have this huge heritage and history of winning a lot of races. And I think he mentioned this last week, actually, that it was nice to have people congratulating him on finishing second and doing a pretty good sprint, and, you know, doing pretty good power numbers, having pretty good power numbers after that first sprint in particular. He lost his way a bit in the remaining sprints last week, but he returned to winning ways.
That's a good point, isn't it? I mean, it must be quite different. You look at Etixx-QuickStep and they're winning, you know, on multiple fronts, and wins can be lost, and that must be a difficult scenario for especially sprinters who can ride very, very well and finish second, but only the win really matters. I mean, that must put a certain amount of pressure on. Yeah,
and as we said before, it's so dependent on what other riders are in play, what other riders you're competing against, because, you know, you can be performing at the same level as you have done for years or even better and still be finishing second, and the bar with Cavendish has been set.
But so Kittel's not in Qatar, so there's no head-to-head there. Do we know that we learned over the weekend? I mean, Etixx-QuickStep sort of slipped out there in the autumn that they weren't going back to Qatar, a race that they have pretty much owned since its inception.
Well, they almost literally own it, because Eddie Merckx, who is heavily involved with, I'm not sure if he's part owner of the company that organises that race, he's also on the board of Etixx-QuickStep. So, and when you consider that Etixx-QuickStep and in their various incarnations, they've almost been synonymous with that race, haven't they? Tour of Qatar, they've dominated it on several occasions, and you add that to Merckx's involvement, it seemed already slightly bizarre, didn't it?
Well, they were quite clever, though, weren't they, in hindsight, to leak it out when they did, just, you know, mentioning in passing that Tour of Qatar wouldn't form part of their early season programme this year, which at the time nobody was that interested in the early season. It was about October, November time, I think. So nobody was paying that much attention. And of course now, on the eve of the race, the Qatari organiser said, well, the reason they're not invited is because they didn't observe podium protocol and they were ill-mannered and rude. And, you know, the women on the ladies' Tour of Qatar were far better behaved, and Etixx-QuickStep were an appalling team to deal with, apparently, allegedly. But there might be more to it than that, mightn't there?
I would suggest there's probably more to it than that. I mean, Patrick Lefevere has admitted in the press that there was a party of some description. Was it Niki Telstra won the overall last year? The end of the race, there was a party and then there was an after party. I'm led to believe. I'm not sure if the after party is the bone of contention, but I think a good time was probably had.
So something might have happened there, is what you're suggesting, Daniel. Something might have happened that might have
on speculation.
Alerted the Qataris to the fact that these were
sort of some kind of hijinks?
Some hijinks.
A la Bradley Wiggins in Beijing in 2008.
Yeah, that, something like a la that. But I think we need to probably investigate this further and find out a reliable rumour that we can then repeat on the podcast.
Eurosport, home of cycling.
Okay, you heard there our new jingle for Eurosport. Eurosport partnering cycling podcast again this year. Thank you very much to them. And coming up on the home of cycling in the next week, the Tour of Andalusia, also known as the Ruta del Sol. That's coming up on Eurosport. And then the races come thick and fast after that. We'll be telling you every week what you can watch on Eurosport and on the Eurosport Player. And thank you very much again to them. A great help in keeping this weekly podcast free. Thank you to them and to Trainer Road, who are still sponsoring us as well. And we'll hear a bit more about that later on, perhaps.
We're kind of veering into Gianni Savio, Androni Giocattoli territory.
Happy to do so.
With our multiple sponsors, aren't we?
Well,
we're spreading the risks, aren't we?
Well, there's no one funding solution. It's
There's
a jigsaw.
lot of room left on the jersey, I would suggest, if anybody's listening. Anyway, let's move to Spain, where Wout Poels, who joined Team Sky last year and had a really strong year. I remember Tirreno Adriatico, where Chris Froome was missing. He really stepped up and won a stage. And you feel like he's a guy with real talent who's not perhaps going to have many opportunities to express that talent at Team Sky. And so the chance he had there, he obviously seized, and a pretty impressive all-round ride by him.
Yeah, and it just shows you early season, everyone's hit the ground running. You know, the concentration of talent in a handful of teams is evident very early on again, isn't it?
Well, in that race particular, I think Andy McGrath, our friend from Rouleur, pointed out on Twitter today that race had only 4 teams represented in the top 10, 3 riders from 3 different teams. So, yeah, it wasn't an exceptionally strong field. You know, 3 races on at the same time. It's all spread quite thin at the moment, but nevertheless, it was, I mean, we've seen already the big teams, the Movistars, the Sky, Etixx-QuickStep are already cleaning up, really.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know, there's a lot of riders who haven't started their seasons yet, several races going on at the same time, and that trend kind of happens throughout February, doesn't it? It won't really be until Paris-Nice and Tirreno Adriatico when you'll see more of a sort of coming together of the peloton and sort of split in 2 halves. At the moment, they're all sort of split in different races, and you know, these races are, I don't want to be sort of disrespectful, but they are kind of
pre-season friendlies.
They kind of are pre-season friendlies.
You're not really in the swing. You're holding back, aren't you? I mean, you're like Kittel.
I made a point to last week to a friend of mine that everyone gets really, really excited about the early season races, and they are interesting. There's little trends that you can pick out, but I don't really start paying attention until Het Nieuwsblad.
Well, as our head of winning behaviours, I think we should probably pay attention to that. Daniel?
Is that me?
No, that's Lionel,
okay.
head of winning behaviours. You're director of marginal gains.
Okay. I would suggest that it tends to be either feast or famine. Intriguingly so for teams at this time of year, and we saw Direct Energy.
Oh, is that what we've got to call them? Oh God!
In the Tour of Qatar, they've won 7 races so far. Sylvain Chavanel,
amazing,
getting off the mark. Brian Cockard, prolific.
Friend of the podcast.
Adrian Petit in the Amis Tropical, Amis Bongo.
Come on, Daniel. Spit it out.
Anyway, that one, you know, we all know the race. So they've hit the ground running. FDJ have had a decent start. But we always see, as we've mentioned in previous weeks, we always see teams that really get into a rut and struggle to get out of it at this time. And it's hard to know. It would be intriguing to find out how much that has to do with how effective and successful the training camps were. I mean, the training camps are a pretty important block of work when it comes to getting teams ready. And do teams, you know, if they have a particularly good couple of camps before Christmas, after Christmas, is that always reflected in their results? And is that why some teams en masse tend to succeed at the start of the season, other teams don't go so well? Or is it to do with momentum, and is it to do with a collective confidence? There are also some teams that have a particular kind of rider who tends to do well at this time of the season. I mean, most races at this time of the season are shorter. They tend to be between 140, 200 kilometres. There are riders who prefer that. There are also strategic decisions that are made. I remember speaking to Fred Grapp of FDJ a few years ago about one particular season, I can't remember which one it was, but around about 2007-8, where he said they'd made a decision that they weren't going to start quickly and they were going to target races in the spring. And his conclusion from that was they would never repeat that experiment, because what had happened was that the sort of rot and the lack of confidence had set in because they hadn't won many races, and it got to April, and they decided from that point forward that they were always going to try and hit the ground running, try and win early, and hope to carry that momentum through the rest of the spring.
Well, you mentioned training camps, Daniel, and I was at the Team Sky training camp a few weeks ago, did a few interviews. We'll hear a couple from there today. Alex Peters was a member of the team down in Valencia that supported Wout Poels to that overall victory. So let's hear from the British neo-pro at Team Sky, Alex Peters. You had a taste of Team Sky end of last year, riding as a stagiaire. But what's it like to step up and be a fully fledged member of the team? It's an obvious question for a neo-pro, but what's it like to find yourself part of this team?
At first, I felt very I really have to pick my game up, and I felt a lot of pressure, and then later on when I met the guys in the team and all the staff, everyone surrounding that makes up the team, they were very accommodating and very nice. So I feel pretty relaxed now about being in this team, and I'm now another piece in that makes up the Sky machine.
But is there a moment when you look around and see some of the guys that are in the team with you, do you have to sort of pinch yourself at times?
Yeah, I had a moment out on the bike today where I was climbing with Chris Froome. I've seen him on the telly winning 2 tours, and so I looked down and then I was, whoa, I'm in Sky kit. What is this, replica kit, or is this real?
Tell me, where you grew up and how you started cycling.
Well, I started seriously cycling when I was 14. Grew up in London. I lived in London all my life. Started seriously racing 14, 15. Joined a club, cycling club Hackney.
You're a neighbour of young Theo, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
So you've sort of grown up together a little bit?
Yeah, we have. I mean, same school. We went to Stoke Newington at school. He's a year below me in school. Bump into each other in the corridors every now and then. And he's 500 metres down the road. He lived from me. And then he moved house 1k away. But we speak, we go out on rides, and I recently messaged him just before coming down here, so we keep in contact.
Yeah, that's amazing that you live so close, and of course he was a stagiaire last year. May end up at Team Sky, who knows, because as you say, he's a year younger than you. He's taking a little bit longer before he makes that step up. Is that nice to have somebody that you're sort of developing in parallel with?
Yeah, it's nice. We support each other, and I like Teo. He's a great character, and it's really is funny how things develop. It's a small world, the family of cycling, and you bump into the same faces, same people. It's like the circus moves around the world, with.
Are you similar kinds of rider, or what? What kind of rider would you say you are?
Teo's a climber. He's light and he's skinny. So me, I feel I'm a general classification. I mean, Teo's a GC as well, but there's a difference between junior races being a GC and these senior incredible.
Good to see a British sports person doing well in Valencia, unlike Gary Neville.
Is that a football reference again, Lionel?
It is, I'm sorry.
Alex Peters, I mean, he'll be absolutely delighted. Only a few weeks ago, he was feeling like a bit of a fraud in Team Sky kit, and he'll feel a fully fledged member of the team. I saw his old school chum, Theo Geoghegan-Hart, tweeting about seeing him on the front and how much he'll be enjoying that. You did feel, speaking to him, he seemed very, very green, although he's had some decent results, and he certainly deserves his chance. It's a huge step up, and I think being part of a winning team right at the start will do him no end of good. At the other end of the world, in Australia, Chris Froome riding the Sun Tour. Odd that Team Sky sent a team to the Sun Tour, was it not?
The Herald Sun Tour.
The Herald Sun Tour, and perhaps there's a clue.
Sponsored by the Herald Sun newspaper.
And who owns the Herald Sun newspaper, Lionel?
It's the Murdoch Empire, News Corp.
Ah, okay.
We don't know at this moment whether there's any correlation between those two.
We're waiting for a text message.
We're waiting for a text message.
But Chris Froome has ridden the Herald Sun Tour before. Again, it wasn't a super strong field, but he's got the year off to win, and Pete Kennick was second overall. He won the first stage, took the overall lead. You got the sense that he was maybe a little bit not entirely happy that he lost the lead on the final stage, but Froome snapped it up.
The legs did the talking, though. Froome was stronger than Kennaugh.
Any lessons from the Herald Sun Tour, Daniel?
It did strike me as slightly odd that it was the outcome of the race, and that was there any way that Sky could have contrived it so that Kenya definitely did win? I mean, the way the final
just
stage
for Froome not to attack.
Well, the way the final stage panned out, but it was a counter attack, wasn't it? I mean, were they legitimate worries that someone else would have?
No, I guess. I mean, Kennaugh, had he been the protected rider, had the whole team been riding for him, I guess he could have defended his overall lead, perhaps. But that's not the way the race panned out. They've got first and second there. They got first and second in Valencia as well. Pretty solid weekend. And I mentioned the Sky Training Camp that I was at a few weeks ago, and I spoke there to Fran Miller, who was head of winning behaviours, but she's now got a more sort of senior role with more responsibilities running the business side of the team. For those who don't know, she's David Miller's sister, and she's been involved at Team Sky from the outset, and one of the sort of most important people there, and has started taking on more responsibility as the team has developed and evolved. So let's hear from Fran Miller about her role and what their hopes and aspirations are for 2016. What's your role here at the Team Sky Training Camp?
Twofold, really. So my new job within the team since July has been Director of Business Operations. The majority of my job up until then was people on the team, so winning behaviours, culture, values, trying to help people make themselves better. And so now I look after all the business ops as well, so marketing, brand, communication. So I'd say 70% of my time here is being spent with each member of staff, putting together their plan for the year, looking at what development opportunities they have, what they want to try and achieve and their goals. And then 30% of it is working with the partner team, the comms teams and the brand teams to make sure that the vehicles are all branded correctly, that the Ford announcement today went well, that we've got the right people in the right kit, that the media are well looked after, that the day goes well. So overseeing all of that as well.
You're on the business side, the announcement that Ford are sponsoring Team Sky, it's been announced as a multi-year sponsorship, but how long is that?
It's multi-year, Richard, that's why we say it.
Well, is it 2 years, 3 years?
What we wanted to do is, obviously it's a completely new partnership for both sides, so what we wanted to try and do was have a couple of years where we could really scope out how the partnership would work together, and there's an option for both of us to continue beyond that for further years. So I think we'd like it to be a 4-year deal, as would Ford, and I think at this stage there's kind of an opportunity to see how that first 2 year goes for both sides. If it works, we'll continue beyond that for a further 2.
Chris Froome has signed for 2 more years with the team as well. Is there any sense from Sky how long they will, team sponsorships are always finite, they don't last forever. Have they indicated how long they might go on sponsoring the team for?
No, I mean, we're incredibly lucky with Sky in that we're sort of a permanent business unit for them now. So we don't have an end contract with them. There's no end date on our contract with them. And I think as long as we continue to deliver for them in terms of inspiration, being at the pinnacle of the sport, riding clean, inspiring people to ride, I think we'll continue to be one of their key sports. But I think obviously we have a lot to do there. It has to continue to make business sense for them. And so it's reviewed on a sort of biannual basis. But I think, my sense is we've certainly got a few more years to go.
I mean, there are 2 elements to that. There's the performance, and obviously that you can't be faulted for performance. It says on the side of the vehicles, 3 Tour de France victories. How about the other side, around the image of the team, getting that message across that has always been a founding principle of the team, that it's competing clean. We saw what happened at the Tour de France last year. Is that one of the big challenges this year, not just to win hearts as well as minds, if you like?
Oh, very nice, Rich. I like what you did there. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think probably when we started the team, we thought the winning would be the hard bit and the other bit would be relatively easy. And I think time has proven that that's probably, don't get me wrong, the winning is obviously incredibly hard and that will always be our focus. But I think we recognise as an organisation, we should be taking a leadership role, and I think just knowing ourselves that we're clean and knowing we're doing it the right way isn't enough. We need to demonstrate that, and I think we came out early doors and said zero tolerance and transparency and everything else, and have we done enough to demonstrate those things? I think probably not, and I think we recognise there's always more you can do. the sport has changed a huge amount in the 6 years that we've been here, and I think we can now take a much stronger leadership position on some of those points and definitely do more, definitely open the doors a bit wider and share a bit more how we do things and be a bit more, one of the things I love about this team is that when people come and spend any length of time with us, or if we get a new carer or a new mechanic from another team join us, 9 times out of 10 they'll say, God, I wasn't expecting everyone to be so nice. And I was like, well, what were you expecting? And I think we have this perception of being quite cold. And
your brother calling the team bus the Death Star, that might not have helped.
Yeah, not very helpful. And that has stuck, that nickname, which is really unhelpful. But hey-ho. So I think it's already here. We're a passionate group of people who love what we do. You can't do this sport and this job if you don't love it. So I think showing a bit more of that passion, a bit more of the love of it, a bit more of our own desire to make this sport different and better and push it forward. I think that's a big goal.
What will that involve exactly? I mean, in terms of being more proactive, more transparent, what do you have some concrete, tangible things in mind to do between now and Tour de France?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are, I think we're definitely going to do more about opening up some of the training that we do with Tim Kerrison. I think in some parts of the media world and our fan base that he's a little bit of an unknown entity. And I think, obviously there's the fine balance between opening everything up and giving away your competitive advantage and letting people in far enough so they can understand how you're doing what you're doing. And I think we definitely are looking to do more with Tim, more with that core training group, giving people more access to Chris, giving people more access to other people in the team. Dave and Tim are obviously very much at the forefront of the performance side, but there's an awful lot of people that contribute to a win. And I think, showing how our mechanics work, how our nutritionist works. Weight loss is a massive thing at the moment in the sport, and we get fingers pointed quite a lot at how do our riders get so skinny, why are they so skinny, how do they maintain power. Well, that's something that we can explain. There's a science behind that, and we have a fantastic nutritionist from Liverpool, John Moores, who can articulate that in a way that people can understand. So I think opening sort of the door to some of those stories that aren't just about Froome and Tim, but a bit about how the whole philosophy of the team and how we do things.
Well, we'll take you up on some of those offers that you made there, Fran. We'll be attending training camps and we'll be getting interviews with all these guys over the course of the year.
Yeah, no problem at all. You'd be very welcome.
The Telegraph Cycling Podcast, brought to you by Trainer Road, cycling's most effective training tool. Pair your power meter with over 800 workouts and 80 training plans to make you a faster cyclist. Visit trainerroad.com/TCP to try Trainer Road risk-free for 30 days.
Okay, you heard there our extended Trainer Road jingle. Lionel and I are still training very hard. I trained hard this morning, actually. I'm suffering now. I did an hour and a half session.
Was that a hard one?
Well, it wasn't as hard as I expected to be, actually. I coped with it all right. And I did a bit of watch sort of video while I was doing it, so I felt like I was doing a double shift almost. I was watching a video relevant to this.
I watched Karate Kid.
No, I watched this series of lectures, actually.
God, what a fascinating life you lead.
Connected to our work. It was really good.
Wonderful.
But,
good. We've got
pain and pleasure. That's what it's all about.
We've got a couple of free months to give away.
We do.
To people who would like to have a crack at the Trainer Road app for themselves.
How should we give those away if anybody's interested? Tweet.
Will we give them away on Twitter?
Yeah, tweet at cycling_podcast and then copy in at Trainer Road as well, just so they can see that you're following us.
And tell us why you need a free month of training motivation. And
we'll select the best. I think we've probably got 4 free months, so maybe 4 people will win that, so have a go. I'm off on a secret mission this week to record our next but one, or the next one after the next one, Friends Special. The next one is HCC High Road Special, which should be available next week, I think.
It's so secret you haven't even told me what it is.
No, I haven't, Daniel. I can't. I'm sworn to secrecy. But I'm off to Nice this week on this covert mission.
Know what it is.
Anyway,
Team Vino, isn't it?
No, it's not that. I have to give a big thank you to Nice Pebbles for helping me find some fantastic accommodation during my stay. They rent out almost 200 properties across Nice and are offering an exclusive discount to the Cycling Podcast listeners this March. If you fancy making a last-minute trip to see the final 2 stages of Paris-Nice, you can get 15% off any booking made over the weekend from Friday the 11th to Monday the 14th of March. Simply go to their website, nicepebblesproperties.com, and enter the code CYCLE15 at the checkout. We were going to be plugging in this week's podcast our event at Foyle's Bookshop with Ciro Scognamiglio on the 22nd of February, but that seems a bit pointless because it's sold out in less than 2 days.
It has.
Extraordinary.
Overwhelming demand to see Ciro, I can only assume.
40,000 tickets. 200 tickets sold to see Ciro. Amazing. We'll get him back. I mean, we will have to get him back now. There's a lot of people disappointed. So we will record it, though, and put it out as a friend's special. So those who are not there will be able to hear it at some point in the future.
And we'll get him back for Wembley Arena or the O2 or something.
We'll have to step it up, won't we? We'll have to go somewhere. But yeah, I mentioned the next one after the next Friends special. You can become a friend of the podcast at thecyclingpodcast.com, and it's £10 for 2016. That will gain you access to 11 Friends specials. You can also sign up for 2015 still and listen to the 11 that we released last year. And thank you very much all those who've signed up so far. So there is some more business this week, isn't there? Well, we should maybe just touch briefly on the Fran Miller interview that we heard there. I mean, we've kind of heard this before from Team Sky that, you know, that they're going to reach out and try and win people over in a way that they perhaps haven't simply by or merely by winning races. You know, there's a lot more to being the sort of admired team that they want to be, that they keep talking about. Will they manage that this year? Can you see signs that that's going to actually happen, Daniel?
I think it's an unwinnable battle.
What can they do? What can they do then? If you were head of winning behaviours, if such a position still existed at Team Sky, what would you do?
We've said, only half-jokingly in the past, the first thing they should have done about 3 or 4 years ago is change the kit. They should have chosen
the black.
a brighter, more sprightlier colour for their live...
Yeah, because everyone loves Astana, don't they?
Well, exactly. Powder turquoise. Yeah, not just for their kit, but for the Death Star. You know, we've heard and we've seen this clamour for transparency. When they've tried to be transparent, then I would suggest that the detractors have moved the goalposts. You know, there was this clamour for a VO2 max test, for Froome to do a VO2 max test. Many of us said at the time a VO2 max test isn't going to prove anything, but people still were desperate for this test. Then they did the test, Froome did the test, and hey presto, what happened? People clamoured for different kinds of tests. So, you know, they tried to be more transparent. It hasn't worked. You know, often I think in these cases, when we talk about PR and how likeable teams are, you're really at the mercy of the individuals who are involved in the team. And I'm not suggesting that Sir Dave Brailsford is not a likeable character or Fran Miller's not a likeable character. They are. But we've seen teams in the past that have had a very good reputation purely by virtue of having perhaps more likeable or more charismatic personalities. You know, Bob Stapleton, we mentioned HTC High Road, he was very good with the press, very good with the media. How much of it was contrived, we don't know. But Chris Froome, people just have not taken to him, in not necessarily through any fault of his, but he perhaps lacks edge. He's too nice for a lot of tastes.
He looks unattractive on a bike.
He doesn't look good on a bike.
It can be as simple as that. I mean, Marcel Kittel is enormously popular and he looks fabulous.
Yeah, and people don't like winners. They don't like a rider who is a Tour de France champion going to the Herald Sun Tour and having one of his underlings in the leader's jersey, you know, in a position to win the race and then attacking on the final stage and taking it out of his hands. You know, whether that was pre-agreed with Kenya or not, people just do not like that. It's very cannibalistic, isn't it?
But I think this splits, you know, in different ways, because I would say in the core market, the UK, Team Sky are very popular with a lot of British cyclists, people in Britain. The issue they have is when they get to the Tour de France and they're winning in quite a dominant way, that's when they become unpopular on the roadside, with people on the roadside. And I think that's the most dangerous and damaging part. As we saw last year, the consequences of that can be rather unpleasant, particularly for the riders. And it's softening that part of their image is the difficult bit. But how do you go about making yourselves more popular? I mean, Chris Froome made quite a big effort to, you know, speak French on post-race interviews and what have you. But I think the overwhelming image of this kind of black machine.
It's funny, isn't it? Because, you know, from a PR point of view, they launched in 2010 with Black Kit, which was at the time was very new. But it was literally just after the Men in Black story. There was a story that was doing the rounds about riders training in black so they couldn't be spotted. This was quite early days of whereabouts and anti-doping in a way. I think that the whole machinery around that has improved in the years since. But if you were to launch a new team with the ambitions that Team Sky had, if you'd been looking at the PR consequences of these little details, then you would have said, well, let's not wear black. This is all very easy to say with hindsight, and I think lots of other teams are wearing black now as well. But I think a change in colour would certainly soften the image, wouldn't it? And you never know, it might help. Just why not just a white bus with yellow flowers on it? That would do the job, wouldn't it?
The biggest danger is that if you make any kind of sport not about winning, then there's plenty of teams who aren't winning. That, are they necessarily popular? I mean, are Cofidis popular? They win next to nothing, and they're not sort of, they've become a bit of a laughing stock because they're completely without any sort of success, really. You can't have a situation where not winning is the way to people's hearts.
Yeah, it's an odd one, isn't it? And speaking of, that you mentioned at the start of the programme, Katusha, there's a team that's also pledged this year to become a bit more lovable. They've redesigned their kit. I like their new kit, actually. It looks good. They redesigned their kit, and they expressed this aspiration over the winter to become less Russian as a team and more lovable. I'm not suggesting there's a connection there between becoming less Russian and more lovable, but the idea was to become a bit more of an international team and to also win the hearts of fans a little bit. It's not going to be helped by the latest news, are they?
No, that's quite a list of positive tests, either for riders on the team at the time or in the case of Denis Menchov, that came to light after.
Although it's not as substantial as the list of Russian track and field athletes who were named today as being currently banned from competition. It runs to 4,000 names.
Wow.
Russian track and field athletes. It's not quite in that league yet, but it's not great, is it?
No, and it remains to be seen what action the UCI will take here. I mean, they could be rested, suspended temporarily from competition, waiting to see exactly what measures are placed on them, because this is a repeat offending now. It's 2 in 12 months, isn't it?
It is. But you I have to say, I mean, you're talking about teams with 30 riders, and how much responsibility should the teams bear for a rider going off and doping of his own accord? I think when it's 1 or 2, and there's some benefit of the doubt, but once it's reached 8 in what's that now, 5 or 6 years, that's at the point where really the team's management has to get a proper grip of the issue and send down some different messages and say, look at the list: Christian Vandenberger, Antonio Colom, Alexander Kolobnev, Denis Menchov, Gianpaolo Caruso, Denis Galimzinov and Luca Paolini before Vorganov. They're not even...
Lionel, what you haven't mentioned, and what perhaps we should mention, is the number of Katusha riders that were involved in very high-profile doping investigation in Italy, the Padova investigation. Evgeny Petrov, Carpets, various others. No convictions were brought resulting from that case, but they were certainly involved with Michele Ferrari. Even our beloved friend of the podcast, Filippo Pozzato, when he was at Katusha, he was involved with Michele Ferrari. So... well, if the UCI Disciplinary Commission takes those precedents into account, the action needs to be as stringent as it can possibly be. Also, if you consider the way the UCI seems to be moving towards almost a closed shop in professional cycling, a league of, the World Tour, you could already argue, is a closed shop of 18 teams. There need to be some controls. There need to be controls on the team. You can't just buy a license and then be free to do whatever you want and not be accountable for ethical choices or violations that are happening within your team. And
let's not forget as well, the team is run by Vyacheslav Ekimov these days, who was a long-time teammate of Lance Armstrong at US Postal, 2004 Olympic time trial champion, having inherited that gold medal from Tyler Hamilton.
That gold medal's like a hot potato, isn't it? Nobody can keep their hands on it long enough to...
The controversial Ekimov inheriting the controversial Tyler Hamilton.
There are certainly questions about Ekimov's career, aren't there, to be asked about, what he saw.
And not
What
just
he
how
had.
you spell his first name, I think. is what you're-
Vyacheslav.
Yeah.
How would you pronounce it differently, Mr.?
No, how you spell
Mr.
his first
Linguist.
name.
Oh, I see how you spell it. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. Anyway, should we wrap things up there? Another little bit of Team Sky news. This happened last week, actually, but Ollie Cookson, the son of Brian Cookson, has moved to Dimension Data. He's been working for Team Sky for a few years. Actually, he got involved in 2010 when their carer, Chema Gonzalez, became ill and actually tragically died during the Vuelta. Ollie Cookson at the time was based in Madrid, and they needed somebody who could speak Spanish to help with the team. He went down, and he's been with the team ever since in a sort of logistics capacity, with responsibility in particular for the winter training camp. But he knows his cycling. He's got maybe more to offer. There was no, when I spoke to him out in Mallorca, he said couldn't see any possibility at Team Sky of moving up the pecking order and getting into a team car or anything like that. Whereas Dimension Data, he's going to be in charge of their base in Lucca, and there is a possibility of him becoming a sort of second DS at certain races. So progression for him, and not to suggest there's anything in this at all, but having the son of the UCI president on the staff at Team Sky has always been something else that people have asked questions about. So I would suggest that that's probably a very good move for him, and wish him luck. I know he listens to the podcast, so good luck, Ollie. Anything else? Daniel, you were looking up your phone there.
No, just waiting for some news actually about Bjarne Riis's project with Lars Seier.
Is that Leo's brother?
No, the former CEO of Saxo Bank, or current CEO. Well, we know there is some kind of alliance between Riis and Seier. They're working on something. They're going to announce exactly what their project is in the last week of February. A lot of excitement in Denmark, or speculation about what that might be. I've heard various things. I've heard everything from the theory that it's a world tour team with funding from the Gulf, to other rumours that it is something not related to professional cycling, not related to teams. It is in fact some kind of hospitality gig, or some sort of
which is very like
agency.
the CSC model, wasn't it? Yeah. Back in the days when Bjarne Riis ran a very successful team in the early to mid 2000s. That was the sponsorship model with that team. It was not so much a consumer facing team, more a sort of almost internal PR.
And actually, Lars Seier did post on Facebook, I think this weekend, expressing his satisfaction that so many cycling journalists had replied to the invitation to the press conference where the nature of the project is going to be announced, but also suggesting that business journalists would be well served.
Maybe they're just going to run a sportif. Maybe they're setting up the Bjarne Riis sportif in Denmark. I think we'll all be up for that, won't we?
Yeah, just advertise it as 200k and then cut it down to 39k, just straight up.
Very good. Reference there to the 1996 Tour de France. Excellent. Well, we leave it there. As I say, our next special should be released next week, all being well. That's the plan. We've got back with us a regular, slightly shorter episode next week. The following week, I think we've got an extended interview with Lizzie Armitstead. That will be the whole episode that week. And that is the week of Het Nieuwsblad. So that's when Lionel springs into action. Looking forward to that.
Suddenly start paying attention properly. I'm going to Het Nieuwsblad in Kuurne, Brussels, Kuurne.
Well, that helps.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, good luck. Thank you very much, Daniel.
Thanks,
Lionel.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast. Thank you to Glass Pear for the music in this episode. For more information and to download more editions of the show, visit thecyclingpodcast.com.